Welcome to another episode of Witty CFB. Your host, Rob Sheply here. And on today's episode, we're going to be discussing Ryan Day and the Ohio State Buckeyes. Now, I elaborated a little bit last on the Alabama episode, but I think for this episode, I really wanted to discuss on who, in my opinion, believes that, who has the most pressure to win a national title this year. And I would say unequivocally, the answer is the Ohio State Buckeyes. You know, Ryan Day, once I was sitting there thinking about it, I'm like, man, he's on his seventh year already. Seventh year, no national title. I think, he's a phenomenal coach, a leader of men, somebody that you want to play your ass off for, knows the X's and O's, has every single thing that you would want. But at the same time, it's, after losing 3 years in a row to Michigan, you know, it comes to a point where something has to give. And to me, I think this year, when I sit down and really think about it, I think this is really Ohio State's best year to win a national championship. I would argue that you have the best roster in the country, a relatively favorable schedule, the best defense in the country. You have you have you have Jenkins coming in from Ole Miss, the running back, who that guy is electric. He's exciting, and he's gonna add. And I think he's gonna take a lot of pressure off Will Howard, which we'll get to in a second too. But I think most importantly, I think to me, everything is there for them to win. You don't have to worry about Michigan. You don't have to really worry about Alabama. We'll talk about the schedule in a second, but you know, I sit down and think about it. I'm like, I would say Georgia is the favorite, yes, but even a couple years ago, they were a field goal kick away from getting to a national championship or possibly even winning one. So when I sit there and think about Ohio State, I'm like, it's not that far fetched to believe that. To me, this I think this needs to be their year. I feel like when I talk about with my buddies and with my friends, and I'm somebody who went to Penn State, Michigan, and you always hear about Michigan, Ohio State dominating the Big Ten, but I think just push kind of has to shove here. And so I wanted to kind of dive a little bit deeper into Ohio State and discuss why I think this needs to be their year. 100%. I think it has to be their year. So I think first and foremost we're just going to kind of be discussing. I think first and foremost I really want to get into the schedule. Let's. I think by the way, I I would say the only game that I have my biggest concern on this entire schedule is October 12th at Oregon. To me, that is 100% going to make or break their season in terms of if Ohio State comes in and just whoops some ass over at Oregon. I if they dominate, let's say they just dominate Oregon in that game, I think you walk away from that October 12th game and say to yourself, okay, they're probably they might be the favorites to win the national championship at that point, assuming that Oregon's undefeated by then. And then, you know, like to me, I don't see any reason. Like I'm going to rattle off the schedule, but when I get to the end of this, I per every beat writer within within the state of Ohio is going to say, oh well, there's all these variables in college football. Oh well, you never know what's going to happen, or oh it could take a second for one game could slip. I'm like, no, I'm tired of hearing that you know the falling shorts and losing to Michigan, and to me this just needs to be their year. It's just that straightforward because they are way too freaking talented, and Ryan Day is too damn good of a coach for them to not be able to finally win a national title this year. So, okay, rattling off the schedule. You have Akron, Western Michigan, Marshall, Michigan State, Iowa, Oregon, the game I just referenced. Then 2 weeks later, you have Nebraska, Penn State, Purdue, Northwestern, Indiana, Michigan. I don't see any reason why you can't go undefeated with that schedule. I think, granted, obviously, it's never easy playing at Penn State, never easy playing at Oregon, but at the same time, I you know, it's just these are just games that you need to win. And we can talk about the November 30th against Michigan too. I think that's going to be a game that I certainly have on my calendar. But you know, obviously, we're not taking into account when we're talking about this national championship run. They would also let they would have to go undefeated in the regular season, but they would also, I'm assuming that they're winning their conference championship and they would win the national title too. I think in order for Ohio State to win the national title, I think they just have to go undefeated. I think they need to have that flawless season where there really is no doubt. I think when you look at kind of the previous seasons, when I watched the game last year, I thought to myself, I think Michigan's gonna sweep them again. It's gonna be a clean sweep. And what do you know? Michigan dominated the trenches. They ran the they ran the football all over Ohio State, and they got the win. And then eventually they got the national championship. And I it's just, for the most part, they have a pretty generous schedule. Like, outside, Iowa's offense is not, I wouldn't even call that a 50-50 game until Iowa shows any resemblance of an offense whatsoever. You can't call that a 50-50 game. And then, obviously Penn State is in, I love Penn State, but at the same time, I did a deep dive in them a couple months ago. But as far as I'm concerned, they're in 10 win purgatory until either Ohio State or Michigan somehow fall off the face of the earth, or James Franklin, or they replace James Franklin with somebody else. I love James Franklin, but I, we'll that's a different discussion here. But in general, I'm not saying it's going to be a cakewalk. I probably am kind of downplaying some of these games, but it's just, you just get to a point where Ryan Day's season now. You can't have the same excuse that I talked about the last time with Caleb DeBoer. Oh, he just needs a few seasons to kind of get his sort of message out and all that stuff. I'm like, it's it's there. It's ready to go. And with that said, I kind of discussed the schedule a little bit, but I'm just going to kind of discuss a little bit more just about the team in general and why I just think it's just so paramount that the expectation this year really needs to be a national title. Now, do I think they can do it? I I think they can. I think after I'm going to talk about a couple of reasons why I think they can, and I'm going to elaborate on two of my biggest concerns on for this team in general. But you know, I think they have every single reason why I think they can do it. It's just there's just two outliers that I'm a little bit more reluctant to kind of fully pull the trigger, but I'll discuss that in a moment. Now, like I said before, I think other than Georgia, Ohio State is the I would Ohio State probably has the best roster in the entire country. I think you can flip flop back and forth in saying Ohio State's one and Georgia's two, or Georgia's one and Ohio State's two. They're obviously always in the top five in terms of recruiting classes, transfer portal, all that good stuff. I don't think I really have to kind of dive into specific players and the transfer portal and all of that. I think it's kind of, you know, it's already implied that they've always pretty consistently always had some of the best rosters in the entire country, and they do a great job at recruiting and getting those transfer portal guys in and all that stuff. But I think too, we're going to talk about weaknesses now. The nobody's ever I'm not concerned about this defense at all. The defense is the pillar of what Ohio State football stands for. They're they're gritty. They're going to play you tough. They're disciplined, and they get the job done. And so I'm not gonna talk about too much about the defense, because I think everybody understands that the defense is the heart of this team. And so when I think about you know, what are the two reasons why they couldn't win a national championship outside of not being able to beat Michigan? It's twofold. I think first and foremost, to me, the biggest question is can Will Howard take that step forward and be that game changer? And you know, I would go as far to say that I don't necessarily think they need Will Howard to be CJ Stroud for. I don't think they need him to be the type of playmaker that CJ Stroud is, or Cardell Jones, or any of those guys. I think really what Kyle McCord was kind of missing with Ohio State is he. I I struggle with this because I would almost make the argument that I think Kyle McCord is probably better than Will Howard. I would probably sit there and say I think they would have been better off keeping McCord for another season instead of letting him go into Syracuse. But not even I think what was missing about Kyle McCord is he just didn't have that like I he's one of those guys where I think he has solid arm strength. He doesn't really turn the ball over too much, but he's not the type of guy that I sit there and say he can take a game over. He's not the type of guy where you're down by 7 or you're down by 3 or we need that game-winning drive and Kyle's going to make all the throws on the field. I just don't think he's that type of guy. I think he's a great leader. I think he's athletic. I think I think he's a solid pro-style quarterback who you know can get the job done. But at the same time, I would I would find it difficult to argue that Will Howard is really much of an upgrade compared to Kyle McCord. When I when I think of those two side by side, I think a lot of what you saw at Will Howard, Kansas State, I think resembles a lot of what you see in Will McCord. And I would love to hear what some Kansas State fans and Ohio State fans think of that sort of comparison. But I see a lot of resemblance between the two, and I would be hard pressed to kind of really sit there and say definitively that like yes, Will Howard, you know, Will Howard is really going to be the reason why they make it to national title. I just it's tough, but I think what's good for Ohio State is I think it was I think it was fairly obvious that Ohio State kind of told Kyle like, hey, like we're going to bring in Will Howard. You can kind of do whatever, but what's good about it too is I think two things have to happen. I think one, you can't rely on Will Howard to for every single play. I think it's not like it to be at Oregon where Oregon knows you can just Dylan Gabriel's is going to light it up for 350, 400 every game. It's not going to happen, which is what a big reason why they brought in Jenkins from Old Miss because they know that they don't I think what we're going to see with Ohio State this year, I think we're going to see a pretty balanced attack from them. But I think what really needs to happen, I'm not concerned about Jenkins. I think Jenkins is one of the best running backs in the entire country, and I think he's going to prove it this year. But I think what really needs to happen outside of Will Howard making sure that he doesn't turn the ball over, that outside of not turning the ball over and not taking bad sacks or bad penalties or anything like that is I think the offensive line really just kind of has to, you know, I think they really just kind of have to take that step and really fight in the trenches too. 'Cause I think they're going to face a ton of tough defenses this year, and for me to really feel confident about Ohio State winning a national championship, I have to see earlier in the schedule with Western, with those kind of Western Michigan teams, you know, with with that, I think that Iowa game, I think is going to be fascinating in the sense of I think to me that storyline is going to be can that offensive line stand up to Iowa's defense because Iowa's defense been one of the most consistent has been consistent for the past 5 seasons, and you know they're not there to be taken lightly. So when it comes down to it, they're just it just has to it just has to kind of take another step ultimately. Because I think a lot when you think of a lot of Ohio State's wins last year, I think they did a lot of it on the passing side, particularly when they played, the Marylands of the world, and all of that too. And obviously there were some health concerns and all that stuff, but I think really what it's going to come down to is, can Will Howard, you know, is Will Howard really any sort of an upgrade compared to Kyle McCord? Can Ohio State take care of business when they should? And will the offensive line take over games? And Ohio State be able to run the ball down people's throats? And ultimately, I think they have every single tool and weapon and roster upgrade and a great head coach to get the job done. But you know, ultimately, it just comes down to can can they get the job done? And